Welcome back. The last time I talked about my league game with WKSP, and I discussed the Endgame play on the Eastern Front in particular. This is the historical opening. I was playing as the Allies against Sotakarhu from the first round of the league, and it was also the last game to finish from the first 3 rounds. It's the closest league game I played in those rounds. At this point, I had 5 wins, but the Sotakarhu game had not gone well. I'd only narrowly avoided a complete med lock, and the USSR collapsed in 1942, so it looked bad in the mid-game. But I did well with the Soviets in the final summer offensive, and it might be winnable if the Western forces can hold up their side in 1944. This one is an interesting position, so I thought it was just worth discussing. Turkey is on 4 national will. That's the capital, Ankara, or 2 cities. And it's worth discussing why I spent my strategic move here to move 1 unit, 1 hex. This is a really aggressive use of strategic move with the shock army. What it does is it links the zone of controls of the Soviet and the British units. That creates a barrier that prevents the 2 Turkish units from reaching Ankara. The Soviet unit in the port can, and therefore is, threatening to take Turkey out of the war this turn. The Turks can stop that from happening by moving a Turkish unit to west of Siswas and creating a zone of control to block the move. But that makes the city very vulnerable to the British. And this is what happens. The attack southwest of the city leaves it open, the 8th Armour can just walk in, and Mersin is vulnerable to an attack, and it's in the fair weather zone, creating the possibility of seizing both cities, requiring only a single successful attack on Mersin, which is possible because it's fair weather down there. Anyway, the upshot is that single move of 1 hex with the strategic move created enough problems for the defence that I'm able to collapse Turkey this turn, and thus free up the Western units and open a threat into the Balkans. But Turkey is fundamentally a sideshow, one that has tied down too many of my troops. The real event is, as it usually is, in France. Here I strike Calais, because it is only defended by a garrison. I can use both the partisan and the airdrop in combination to push the odds of a DD up to 32 and 36. And destroying that unit means that instead of marching in with the 1st French, I can use a 2nd surprise marker to land in the city and immediately march out, and then land a 3rd unit into the vacant port, getting 3 units ashore for just 2 surprise markers. This, by the way, is why Calais should be well defended. If you're going to hold a port weakly with the Axis, make it the much less useful Cherbourg. Or right down on the Brest Peninsula or on the west coast, where you're as far away as possible from the German border. Then, all standard territory from here, I cycle in the Allied fighters to suppress the German Luftwaffe unit at Dusseldorf. I do this primarily with British fighters because the troops I have ashore are American, so I want to save their air support. Couple of things going on with that. It hampers counteroffensives and it burns up German production points. The Germans have 11 left this turn. Every production point I take away on the Western Front is 1 less strength step facing the Soviets. It's worth saying that landings inevitably drain Allied supply capabilities. I'm conducting a major landing operation in France. I'm still conducting that operation in Turkey, and there's just not enough production points left to sustain my forces in Spain. For that reason, I exhaust the RAF fighter, suppressing the German fighter further north, because I'm not going to be able to keep that fighter supplied, and therefore I'm not going to be able to rebuild it. And it's worth pausing here to say just how much of an uphill battle this is in the endgame. The German army has 73 national will. There are still 6 German minor allies in the game. That kind of diplomatic result where the Germans get this many minor allies is now in the 2.5 version quite unusual, because it's much harder to activate Turkey, virtually impossible to activate Spain, and the Axis have to burn an additional success to get Italy on side. The Axis counterattack contains what I consider to be a mistake, but quite a common one. The 3 German units combine to make an assault against the American 1st Armoured. People do that to generate a high DRM, but the US unit has no retreat. DRs are step losses, and potentially those units could have generated 11 mobile attacks. To protect the US unit, I would need to spend air resources, while here I only need to spend 1 sortie, and anything less than a DD will simply be repaired at the end of the turn. So though the odds look better in a combined assault, the mobile attacks are actually much stronger. In July, I extend the beachhead. My main focus is to push east, therefore threatening the German lines of communication. Force the troops in France to retreat without actually having to engage them, which is good, as we've already noted. I have a lot of Western units tied up in Turkey and Spain, which really ought to be here. You can see that by the start of August, I forced the Germans to abandon Paris without even attacking it. I'm going to show you something interesting here, which is a quirk of the USE rules that I don't particularly like and would prefer was eliminated from the game, but you ought to know about it if you are playing in a league. I cannot afford to abandon Antwerp. I need it in order to sustain my advance. But that doesn't prevent the unit in Antwerp from attacking Rotterdam and Amsterdam. Because those units are defended by garrisons, if I get a DD or a DE result, and that is what I get in both cases, I create a no enemy zone of control in those hexes. That allows the 1st French to take the towns, then simply walk back to its position at Antwerp. It's a silly rule. The game doesn't need it. It makes defences actively weaker because they contain additional troops, which is counterintuitive, and it hugely increases how much offensives hinge on early dice rolls. All round, it's just a bad rule, but you should be aware of it. If you forget about no enemy zone of control markers and the way that they work, effectively allowing units to freely move in close proximity to the enemy, you will set up bad defences and you will miss opportunities for breakthroughs. Spain falls this turn as Madrid was left unprotected. This allows me to pin the panzer at Gibraltar. Sotakarhu misses a trick here. Gibraltar is not a Spanish city, it's a UK city, which means the Italian fleet could have been moved to Gibraltar and provided supply for the panzer. The panzer would still have been isolated, but it would have put up a reasonable defence. In case you're keeping score, at this point the Soviets have made it into Poland and the Germans are down to 59 national will. September, and I want to take Vichy out of the war. Fortunately, I do not need to fight for this. I can just march the US unit into Toulouse. That reduces the Axis to just 2 allies, and Sweden is a very limited value in the endgame. Unfortunately, Italy is a significant obstacle, and it's going to survive the summer offensive. Bad news in the north. The cumulative effect of all the mid-game problems, and thus the diversion of troops to Turkey and Spain, and I don't make it to the German border. Which, by the way, is your main objective in the landings in Normandy. Get ashore, get off the beaches, get over the Rhine. Over the Rhine is almost always a winning position. Fall significantly short of it, and you're in trouble. I talked in the last episode about how the end game divides up into 3 parts, and here we're coming to the end of the first part, which is the final summer offensive, and the Soviet and Western forces have basically just one objective in that: to get troops into Germany, preferably to take factories. Every factory that falls is 2 fewer production points every month, and in the next phase, the winter rebuild, that's going to have a huge impact on how strong the German forces are able to get. All of it's not helped by falling into a silly supply trap northeast of Dijon. But I do get a critical piece of luck. In October, it's fair weather in the mild zone, an extra turn of offensive for me, a turn less for the German rebuild. That's important because the Germans are right on the edge. They need 3 production points to recover step losses, 17 production points to rebuild units, and 63 production points to rebuild the Luftwaffe. At 24 production points a month, that's 4 months, assuming I don't take any factories or inflict any further damage. So it's doable without the October. It's probably not doable if I get a fair weather October, which I did. Obviously, I lose the unit in the supply trap and the ground I gained at Dijon. Silly mistake. I deserved to be punished for that. But I get a bit of luck. Two eliminated German units in the Netherlands. And I take out a panzer at Brussels. Technically, I am over the Rhine, though I do not manage to actually take a factory. Here there is an opportunity for a bit more luck. I can pin and attack the German 2nd Infantry at Sedan with the British garrison. The first attack can have a tank marker, and I can give it air support, and I can use it the airdrop. Those are pretty good odds. Now, as it happens, I don't even get a step loss, but you need to try for those sorts of attacks. The Soviets do a bit better with the extra turn of fair weather. They make it over the Oder. Those are German factories falling, reducing their capacity to rebuild. And now we are firmly into the rebuild, and this section's going to be pretty dull. The only interesting bit are a series of probing attacks to take Italy out of the war, which eventually happens in January 1945. The key point here that I want to discuss is the way that the interactions between weather and the units you have on a line weaken this line. Sotakarhu inadvertently creates an opportunity for me to collapse the Italians. On the previous turn, the border had been held by 2 Italian units. Sotakarhu brings up a panzer to strengthen the line, but doesn't withdraw the Italian units from it. If instead of creating a solid line, the panzer had defended on its own, I would have had to attack the panzer to get through. And a German armoured unit behind a mountain range in rough terrain is no easy ask in fair weather, let alone in poor weather. But here I can instead attack the Italian unit to the southeast of the German unit, and that can be attacked in fair weather because it's just below the line for the mild zone and in the warm zone where I got fair weather this turn. And it's much weaker than the German unit, allowing me to effectively bypass the German unit and pin it. And it matters because by this point the Soviets are pressing on the opposite side of the Italian border. Collapsing the Italians doesn't just remove all of the Italian troops, it also means the German troops now need to cover the additional hexes on the Alps. The Germans have been pressed hard here, and they won't be able to complete a full rebuild. Most of the German units will be back, but the Luftwaffe will still be exhausted. At the end of this, they have 47 national will. And I've clawed back a lost position in the mid-game to a difficult but winnable position in the endgame. I'm going to leave you in suspense as to what the outcome actually is and whether or not I succeed in taking Germany at the end. For now, here endeth the lesson.